project that a friend of mine, I think, started, Michael. And it was the idea that really storage in browsers sucked, and there was this new thing called index database that you could use, that Max just talked about. So Michael kind of did it, and then he let it. And then this guy over here picked it up and actually made it a project that is super solid. So you're probably going to hear for the first time ever a CouchDB compatible database that actually works in the browser and that you can use in your day-to-day life. Please bring it, Dale.
It is actually GitHub issue number 97. Before is probably one of the main issues that's blocking the release. We need a logo. So if anybody can creatively come up with a nice logo, it'd be really helpful. So Nuno kind of stole my first slide. Well, no, he didn't steal my first slide. So who am I? I'm Dale Harvey. I work for Mozilla in the Boot2Gecko project. Don't need. Or am I not talking close enough to it? Sorry about that. Hello. I'll never be a pop artist. So I'm one of the PouchDB authors. I was a CouchDB contributor. I worked at Couchbase, and I'm just generally an open source and web geek. And I'm here to talk about PouchDB. So what is PouchDB? Very simple explanation is it's a JavaScript library that on top of works IndexedDB, LevelDB, WebSQL, and HTTP, replicates the entire CouchDB API in a way that lets make sure that each one of these implementations, including the original CouchDB, I just realized that that's the node.js logo. It's dark and you can't see it. So it replicates the entire CouchDB API, and so that each one of these implementations can replicate and talk to each other. And so why did we do this? So I think the problem with CouchDB invented the first telephone. Invented this amazing sync API where it could talk to lots of things and do full master-to-master replication. However, it was this crazy big Erlang server that only really worked on the web as a web server. And so it had nobody to talk to. It was sitting there up on its own, and you could do some kind of cool things talking server to server. But really it didn't have, it could only talk to itself. And where I found, so PouchDB had a lot of interesting features, but the main one for me was massive master replication. And the main use case that I had in mind for it was for building offline applications, applications that work in your browser, on your desktop, on your tablets, on your mobile phones, ones that need to work offline, and ones that need to sync data. And when you think about those class of applications, that's pretty much every application. There isn't many applications that couldn't benefit from a reliable storage that sync data. And so that was the kind of original reason for PouchDB. The CouchDB didn't have any way to build on the client side. And so one of the kind of main things, and I don't know if anybody missed the reference, but there's Honey Badger. Kind of like Honey Badger, PouchDB won't die. I realize that's not a very positive thing to say about somebody, but there is a very positive reason for it. So I first heard about PouchDB about 3 years ago. I think Peter Braden was the first one that kind of talked to me. He was working on a thing called Browser Couch. Browser Couch kind of replicated JavaScript MapReduce based on local storage. And I'd been using CouchDB at that point, and I found it really interesting, but I kind of smiled in a way that that's really interesting, but it's kind of crazy. Local storage sucks. It's not a particularly useful project. And it's the same way most people smile at me now when I say I'm replicating CouchDB in a browser. They're like, that's just crazy, that's never going to work. And so 2 years ago, I joined Couch One. And at Couch One, Michael started talking to me about it as well. He'd started another kind of project similar to Browser Couch called IDB Couch. This was before IndexedDB had even. And so there was no way for anybody else to use it, and everyone else still thought it was crazy at this time. Around a year ago, Michael, Max, and Randall were carrying on with this, so this project kind of died for a year. About a year later, Michael started again, renamed it, called it PouchDB, did a whole bunch more work, got a whole proof of concept going. IndexedDB was available in browsers at this time. But again, lasted a few more weeks, and I've actually got, yeah. So this is how PouchDB development's been going. This is 2 years ago. This was IDB Couch. This was sometime around a year ago, and this was the very first implementation of PouchDB. Then I started working at Couchbase, and I worked on Couchbase Mobile, which was some crazy feat of engineering. A guy called Aaron Miller is a genius. Put the Spider Monkey and Erlang VM on iOS and Android, which is just a crazy thing to do. But it worked, and we got it all reasonably stable and decided that this isn't the best way forward. We're working against the grain of the platform. And so Jens who also worked at Couchbase, has started working on TouchDB, which was a complete re-implementation for Objective-C on top of SQLite. And by this time I was getting more familiar with CouchDB. I'll just take a drink then. So at this point I was getting more familiar, and I kind of understood that actually re-implementing CouchDB's API isn't as crazy as we first sounded. And so I started working on PouchDB at that time, and that is exactly then. And I went a bit crazy. I got loads of code done. Michael started getting sick of me sending pull requests, so he switched over to my branch. And then I left Couchbase, so I actually was working full time for a couple of weeks on it. And then unfortunately, around there, I got a job. And as much as I found PouchDB interesting, I really loved my job. I work on Gecko. I wish there was more of me so I could work on all of these projects. And so it kind of died for a while again. However, over the last few weeks, and so since I've started my job, without me having done any work, the web SQL implementation is already in progress. Level DB adapters to make it work in node.js, they're in progress as well. People are working on documentation. There's a Travis CI hook, so every time you commit, it does automated testing. There's a few large projects that have talked about how they're going to be based on PouchDB, and they're putting new issues. They're making this the most stable thing that's possible. They're filing new issues every day, which is great, and submitting new pull requests. And there's even, last week I was trying to help someone find a job for PouchDB. So if you want a job, come talk to me, because there's not many other people who are experienced for that. And so why did it have this few spurs of development and then dynasty? Why didn't it just hit the ground running? The main reason for this is it was long before its time. When I first heard of Browser Couch, all that was available was local storage, and local storage sucks. Web SQL was still in flux. It is now dead. However, it's the only thing you can use on the iPad and iTouch, iPhone, and Safari and Opera. They've not implemented IndexedDB yet. IndexedDB, as I said, when Michael first started this, he was using a private build, development build in the browser. It hadn't been released yet. IDB came around, I think it got first released in browsers just under 2 years ago. There was no app cache, so I mean, we had an offline capable data store for applications that couldn't possibly ever work offline, so that was kind of pointless as well. Packaged web apps and just general offline web apps in general, and projects like PhoneGap, which wrap up packaged web apps as well. These weren't really common things at that time, so there just wasn't enough prior knowledge to. I work on Gecko, and people are still confused about the idea of web apps that work offline. They really don't understand the concept. And so it was just generally before its time. Also, node.js was 3 years ago it just got released. And so there wasn't an army of Node developers who wanted this tiny embeddable database in their Node as well. And another reason why this is a great time for PouchDB is the rise of mobile. I don't really need to spend a lot of time explaining to everyone how popular mobile is. Mobile internet's going to take over desktop internet by 2014 was the last estimate. 1.2 billion smartphones, all with the internet on them. And one of the major problems with mobile computing is that offline is a fact. People are going to be offline. One of the interesting things about the growth of mobile is a lot of it is happening in developing markets. In China and India, where you don't have great internet. I was in Brazil 2 weeks ago, and even in a fairly wealthy area like Sao Paulo, being on the internet all the time is a nightmare. They have really interesting problems to do with how their data plans are provided, the limits on them. And so the ability to store data and connect locally to it, local data is always going to be best. Even with a fast connection, it's not as fast as local data. And when there's no connection, then obviously it has to be local. So that's the offline. Is there any more I need to talk about there? No. And another reason I think problems like PouchDB are really important is syncing data is really hard. And it's a surprisingly hard problem that I don't think a lot of people understand quite how hard it is before they get into. Did anybody see, I think this is Scott Hanselman. He had a blog post last week. Everything's broken and nobody's upset. And when you sit and go through it, you look at all the problems and like sync, 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 sync. I think about just over half of them were problems to do with sync, and they're problems to do with really big companies who have lots of effort and infrastructure still not being able to do sync right. And so if you think these companies are having these problems, when you try to do it yourself, you have so many more. And that's the thing, probably one of the more popular to-do lists for iOS. They spent 2 years trying to implement sync for their things to do app. And that is a fairly large company with a lot of infrastructure. And so why is sync really hard to do? Firstly, we talked about being offline and being mobile. The bad connections, you have to be able to have a protocol that understands how to retry requests and understands when things get broken in the middle, that they know how to recover from that. One of the important things about sync is that you want to minimize the amount of data that you transfer between each peer. So you don't want to be sending all the changes in the world when you've just changed the same thing 50 times. You want to only send the last recent change or the ones that they need. But you want to be flexible enough to say, I do want to grab all those changes. You want to have the choice. When you're syncing with, I'd imagine most of you in here have at least a smartphone, probably a tablet, possibly 2 computers. So you can't just worry about single peer sync, because you're still going to have, at the very least, multiple devices trying to connect to a single peer. And in a lot of other cases, things like Spotify, things that do true peer-to-peer, you're going to have to worry about multi-master scenarios. That gets really complicated. And the only reason that I found PouchDB interesting is because CouchDB has provided a very simple API that allows people to understand and work around the problems of conflict resolution without having to think about it. It's a very simple case of and I didn't want to have too many slides that went into technical details because I'd be going on for years. So it's just a simple case of it stores each version. Your application gets to decide which version wins, or it does manual merges. And there are lots of ways to be fixed around sync. So Dropbox But if you've ever implemented ActiveSync or a few of the other Sync API protocols, like CouchDB is by far the simplest one I've used, so that's why we built it. So the current status. One of the great things about cloning software is you don't need to make decisions, or you don't need to, you get a whole bunch of code that's already written for free. So I spent weeks rewriting all the CouchDB tests into PouchDB tests, pretty much one-to-one. And if anybody tells you callback hell doesn't exist, then try and look at those tests, because we had nice synchronous tests in CouchDB written in Erlang, and we had to make them all JavaScript in the browser. It sucks. But they all work. They're all passing Firefox and Chrome, possibly, hopefully, Internet Explorer. Nobody's actually tested that, I think, yet. I'm sure it'll work. That's how Internet Explorer works, right? Safari, all the WebSQL implementations are in progress right now. Somebody's written an IndexedDB shim, so you can use the IndexedDB API on top of WebSQL, and that works, had all tests passing, so that's just being reintegrated now. There's a Node version in progress. There's Sauce Labs, Travis CI, there's a whole bunch of contributions rising, and the release is imminent. It's pretty much waiting on the WebSQL integration and the new logo. And thank you. There's, oh, sorry. So it's on PouchDB.com, it's on GitHub. As I said, this is nothing to do with Mozilla, it's not a sponsored project. So this is very much anybody who's interested gets involved, and there's been quite a lot so far, so I'm quite happy to see everyone get involved. Thanks. Thanks.